Welcome to The Buzz. I'm Christopher Conover. Voters in the city of Tucson are about to get their ballots in the mail for the city council race. This week, we look at who and what is on the ballot. The City of Tucson election will be conducted by mail, which means next week the Elections Department will begin sending ballots out. In addition to city council races, City of Tucson voters will be asked to decide on an increase in the minimum wage. If voters approve, Proposition 206 would raise the minimum wage in the city to $15 by 2025. C.J. Boyd with Tucson Fight for 15 says now is the time to raise the minimum wage in the city.
It's just overdue. So it was a good time 10 years ago, and it's a better time each year that passes that it hasn't happened. And so we're really I think what's unique about this year is we were so close to passing it at the federal level, and there's already widespread support, much largely because of that national conversation that had already been taking place, that when we started talking to voters here, when we were collecting signatures, we just found it was overwhelmingly supportive. Most folks thought either we had already done this, or that we were already in the process of doing this, at the federal level, or if they'd seen what had happened, they were really angry at some of the, things that got in the way of that, including our own Christian cinema, and that really, I think that's just made people more determined to make sure that we can do this in Tucson right now. I mean, I still think we need to do it federally. It's not like this isn't the end. This is just a step in the right direction. But I hope that this, continues.
Does this minimum wage increase that's on the ballot, does it provide additional protections for workers, or is it just a straight increase to $15 an hour?
No, there are a few additional protections. The one that I am most excited about is it actually, and it's the largest thing that I think it does besides raise the minimum wage, is it creates an office of wage enforcement here in Tucson. And a lot of folks don't realize this, but wage theft is the largest kind of theft in the country. It outpaces every other kind of theft, from violent robberies to white collar theft, fraud. All of it just combined still doesn't equal as much as a wage theft in this country. And part of why that is because it's not enforced. And that if the average factory worker or custodian or restaurant worker is not paid what they are owed, what they are contractually owed, there really isn't anyone they can go to and have that set right. They're not going to go to the police, and even if they did go to the police aren't going to say that's not really what we do here.
What else is in this initiative?
There's a practice of what's called tip pooling at many restaurants or bars that have a tip jar that everybody splits, and that's fine. But there are some places now that will include management and even the owner in the same tip pool as employees making minimum wage. And there's a provision in this to say you can't do that. One of the ones that I really like in it, this has affected me personally. I used to work at a bar in Chicago many years ago where sometimes you show up to work, you're on time, you're ready to work, and they say, we're pretty slow tonight. We're just going to send you home. And it doesn't matter that you rode a bicycle across town in the snow. You just go home and you don't get paid anything. There is a provision in this that says, look, you can do that. Employers can do that, but they have to pay the employee a minimum for 3 hours. And this doesn't apply to all. I should mention that's one that doesn't apply to every employer, but I think it's 20 employees or more. It's either 20 or 25. I can't recall offhand, but so it is for slightly larger employers.
The opponents of this say it's bad for business. This could force small businesses to go out of business, which means loss of jobs for people who are making minimum wage potentially. How do you argue against that?
Well, we're very fortunate because we have lots of examples to look at, and that just never actually happens. The simple history of it is that whenever the minimum wage has been going up at the federal or state or county or city level in different places ever since it was established in 1938 under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Um, every time it goes up, people scream, that the sky is going to fall and everything will be destroyed. And that's just never what happens. What we actually see is that the economy improves for everyone when minimum wage workers are lifted up. And that's because the economy does better when more people participate in it. When you have only a small group of people able to participate, even in this local economy, it's really not as good for anybody, because when you give people that already have a lot of money more money, they don't really spend more. They invest it, they save it, they put it away for a rainy day. And when you give low wage workers, we spend it. If you give us more, there's already things that we're not spending it on because we don't have it, and so then we're going to go out and we might treat ourselves to a nice dinner once in a while because we can actually afford it now. We're still not like making tons of money, but it allows for some room there, and to just cover things that were previously had to just be left out.
That was C.J. Boyd with the Tucson Fight for 15 campaign. The main opposition to the increase in the minimum wage and the additional provisions of Prop 206 is the Tucson Metro Chamber of Commerce. Amber Smith is the chamber's president.
Well, this proposition really is built on things far greater than the simple wage issue. There are so many underlying pieces to it that are complicated, in some cases completely against federal regulation and labor laws, and in general feels punitive to employers as opposed to supportive of employees.
What are some of the things, for example, that you say are against federal labor laws?
Sure. So it prohibits the use of using Social Security numbers in paying wages in some cases. And that in itself, of course, is a red flag because no employer wants to be in a position to where they have to choose following the local law.
When we talked to the backers of this, they pointed to some of the parts of it in addition to the jump in the minimum wage. For example, having to pay workers who would normally be sent home, for example, bartenders, restaurant workers, if it's a quiet night, this would require pay for a couple of hours worth of work at least. Do you have problems with some of those provisions also?
Absolutely. What that references is that you have to pay your employees a minimum of 3 hours. And yes, there are so many parts of it that are difficult for the hospitality industry, like servers, but healthcare as well. I mean, so many of those in the healthcare industry have those that work on call or also, pick up when it's busy, are sent home when it's not. And this absolutely crushes them as well.
Would larger businesses, many of whom, or even smaller businesses, many of whom are already paying above the minimum wage, would this hurt them? And if so, is it just because of these other provisions, or would the wage increase also hurt them?
Yes, definitely. So regardless if you're a small business or large business, there's a couple of things happening here. One, we have really tight labor market. Those that want to work are employed, quite frankly. And to retain those employees, employers are paying well above minimum wage in many cases. So what happens, whether you're a small business or large business, is you have to address compression because you're remaining competitive by paying a wage higher than minimum wage. Well, once you raise minimum wage, you're now increasing that bar for all of those wages above it to be able to still show how much you respect the work of your employees and to remain competitiveness.
You have said in the past that you agree that wage earners should make a higher wage. So how do we reach that outcome?
Well, the chamber has been very invested in workforce development efforts. We truly want to lift people up. We want them to have those skills want to be able to have those high demand skills that then earn a higher wage. And then on the other side of it, this is all about cost of living and self-sustainability. We should be talking about skills, skill development, employers that are also giving back to employees by paying for tuition reimbursement programs and continuing education and being able to lift their employees up that way. But there's also cost of transportation, housing affordability, and many additional issues that truly contribute to that notion of self-sustainability and a quote unquote livable wage. It's not simply about the wage, but it's also talking about the cost of living as well.
That cost of living has gone up recently in Tucson as the housing market, both rental and purchase, prices have increased. A wage increase, of course, would hit very quickly as opposed to training programs and things like that you mentioned. So how do we balance those?
Well, one, you don't support a proposition that's poorly written, and I think that's it. And then let's have a community conversation. Let's talk about all of these issues that are contributing to our cost of living. The city and the county both invested in quality early childcare to help be able to provide those services to those that can't afford it. There is a lot of economic data on what that return on investment is. Well, with this proposition and higher minimum wage, those child care workers also are going to are also going to be negatively impacted. Child care programs do, in some cases, have those minimum wage earners, as well as those experienced professionals that are also going to have to absorb compression. Childcare. You're driving up the cost of childcare through this proposition, which is just one more issue of affordability that we're trying to address in this community.
That was Amber Smith with the Tucson Metro Chamber of Commerce. We talked to minimum wage workers in Tucson. 23-year-old Daniela told us the raise could change her life.
Basically, what it would mean is that I would have to work less hours. I wouldn't have to spend so much time feeling stressed out about getting enough hours to be able to pay for housing, pay for food, just pay for the things that I need. And right now, at this point, just like when I've sat down and like budgeted it, I would have to work like 50 hours a week to be able to meet just like my basic living expenses. So that isn't super feasible and has led to just things being really difficult. And it would be great to not have to work that many hours a week in order to just like pay for healthcare, pay for my rent, pay for things like that.
Matt Cable, the owner of Fresco Pizzeria and a partner in other restaurants in town, says a minimum wage increase would be a hit to his business.
You kind of just have to raise your prices accordingly. And then also with labor, you need to be a little more careful. Whereas before you could maybe have that extra person on just to be safe. You're not going to do that as much anymore. But as far as affects the overall business, it's bad timing because right now our food cost is just at record levels. Getting anything from our vendors is at anything reasonable price is just out the window. I mean, we have a lot of our paper goods that you need for like to go and whatnot, and just basic stuff that's more than 100%, that's more than it used to be. And I'm sure the prices of meats and cheeses and stuff like that, and the availability just from the grocery stores.
Cable also says the raise would just be part of the business landscape.
I wouldn't necessarily say it would affect us negatively because we've been dealing with a lot of hits one after the other, and you just kind of look at each one and you see how you're going to deal with it. And our prices are going to go up, and we're going to have to run tighter labor, and hopefully everything's okay after that.
That was local restaurateur Matt Cable talking about how he believes a minimum wage hike would hit his business. This week we're looking at the ballot for the City of Tucson election. Ballots go in the mail next week. 3 Tucson wards, 3, 5, and 6, have races. In Ward 5, incumbent Democrat Richard Fimbres is unopposed. In Ward 6, longtime incumbent Democrat Steve Kozachik is facing independent Val Romero. We'll talk about the open seat in Ward 3 with Dylan Smith, the publisher of the Tucson Sentinel, and Sarah Garrett Gasson, the editorial page editor for the Arizona Daily Star, in a moment. But the three of us began our conversation with Proposition 410, which would give a raise to Tucson's mayor and city council members. The mayor's salary would go from $42,000 a year to $54,000, and city council members would go from $24,000 to $36,000 annually. There's also an automatic cost of living increase, and the raises would not go into effect until December of 2023. Smith pointed out Tucson voters have not given the mayor and council a raise since 1999.
I think part of it is, people just don't like politicians, pure and simple, even if they, may like them individually or their policies. Just politicians as a class, our elected officials are, not exactly the most popular people overall, and voting to give them any kind of money, if it's your choice, as we've seen time and again in Tucson, voters say no.
This particular proposition and formulation, I think, might have more of a chance than prior efforts because it's not you're not voting for a raise for the people currently on the council necessarily because it's delayed in when it would go into effect. But I think Dylan's right that we could have, and I'm not making a comment on anyone in office now, but you could be Superman on the city council and you would not get a voter to give you a raise. I think that's just sort of the lack of understanding of the role of what a city council and mayor do, the need for it, and the need to have people who can make a living wage while
there's
serving
a real
their community.
difference between what we pay members of the city council and also members of the state legislature and so many other elected officials. County supervisors get paid almost 4 times as much as a member of the city council. No wonder that's a job that everybody wants comparatively. But you get what you pay for in one sense. It makes it really hard to get a lot of people who would otherwise be unable to run for office to decide to throw their hat into the ring. And that's partially why we always have these elections where almost no one's running.
I want to switch to the races that we've got for wards 3, 5, and 6. The big race, if you will, Ward 3, it's an open seat. Paul Durham left the city council earlier this year. Karen Ulick was brought in to fill his place, but she said she wasn't running. So we have 3 people running for an open seat on the city council. Kevin Dahl, the Democrat, Alan Harwell, the Republican, and Lucy Libosha, who's an independent. How does this 3-way race shape up?
Well, you said it's the big race. It's one of the only races we're seeing. But I think, given all the circumstances, this is something that I think in all of these, the Democrat will likely win fairly easily. We've seen for several city elections now, the Republicans not putting up very good candidates. Out of these 3 possible seats, this time they put up 1 person across the 3 wards. And you really have to say he's just by far not a great standard bearer for the Republican Party in the city of Tucson.
Yeah, the Democrats have the registration favor, just pure numbers. And I have to say, I don't know how hard the Republicans push trying to get really good candidates to run. It doesn't seem like they're trying very hard. And in some cases. And I think that really does a disservice to not only the voters for not really having a choice, but it also it it makes the elections perfunctory, and so we're not discussing a lot of the issues that really need to be discussed in detail by qualified candidates who have um, the knowledge and the experience to talk with authority on city issues, rather than making generic "I love police, I love public safety," those sort of campaign
Sarah, what would you
platitudes.
like to see them say beyond "I love police, public safety, our roads are bad and need to be fixed"? The things that we hear a lot. What would you like to hear them talk about?
Well, I would like to hear those things, but I would also like to hear realistic ideas for how to improve those things. Instead, we get candidates who make just general statements about things that are their priorities that the Tucson City Council has absolutely nothing to do with, like protecting our public schools and protecting our children, excuse me, children. Um, and or on, for example, Alan Harwell's website, he wants the chief of police to be elected, not appointed. Well, that's not something that you can just wave a magic wand and do. So some detailed information about how you would accomplish things with some
I
reality
don't want to
in
spend too
there too.
long digging into Harwell's situation, because I don't think he spent too long digging into his own candidacy here. But he's somebody. The cliche of a Republican candidate is that they're the party of the business community. He managed to raise before the primary all of $130 for his campaign. That is more than one of the incumbents who's on the ballot. Steve Kozachik and another ward is running without raising any money at all for himself, at least. But Harwell wants to do things like that have nothing to do with the city council. But they put surveillance cameras in school classrooms so that he can make sure that teachers aren't teaching critical race theory, things like that. It's basically tossing around some slogans. There is another candidate in that race who is bringing a little bit more to the table and running at the Democrat Kevin Dahl, who is fairly left leaning, an environmentalist. Lucy LaBoche is running at him from the left and trying to see just how far she can get voters in Ward 3 to move in that direction.
Let's talk about turnout. City of Tucson has gotten itself in trouble with the legislature up in Phoenix because we have these off-year elections. Courts have ruled we're a charter city. We can do what we want on this. Dylan, you looked at the turnout after the primary and found it seems like the vast majority of people who cast ballots were over the age of 55. What does that say about City of Tucson elections and who's voting and what the city council could look like?
I think that's broadly true of primaries in general, not just City of Tucson primaries. The people who turn out to vote are those who've been doing it for a good long time, and it's a habit, and they've done it election cycle after election cycle, and it doesn't really matter to them if it's a presidential year or even just a even-yeared congressional race. They're going to show up and vote. And that's something that kind of a little bit kneecaps more progressive candidates in local elections if they're trying to appeal to younger folks who are a little bit more left-leaning. That's what we saw in the Ward 6 Democratic primary, where Steve Kozachik managed to pretty easily fend off a couple of progressive primary challengers. But to the point about turnout, there are fewer people who vote in Tucson city elections than vote in what you might call the more popular elections, the ones that have higher profile. But city elections would be at the bottom of one of those ballots if we did move to even years. And a lot of people don't make it down to the bottom of their ballot or flip things over. There's, the undervote is huge in some of those races.
Sarah, you were nodding your head.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And I do think that with the loyal, I'm going to vote no matter what the election is kind of folks, they're very engaged and they understand something I wish more people would understand, and that's that we get these low turnouts for the offices that are going to affect our daily lives more than who's president, pretty much. This is trash pickup, this is Tucson Water, this is parks, this is roads. These are the offices that unfortunately get overlooked, even though they have the most direct impact on Tucson residents day in and day out.
That was Sarah Garrett Gasson from the Arizona Daily Star and Dylan Smith from the Tucson Sentinel. The last day to register to vote in the City of Tucson election is October 4th. Ballots go out on the 6th. Visit news.azpm.org for more candidate information. And that's the buzz for this week. You can find all of our episodes online at azpm.org and subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for The Buzz Arizona. We're also on the NPR One app. Megan Myskowski helped produce this week's show. Jim Blackwood is our production engineer. Duncan Moon is the interim news director, and our music is by Enter the Haggis. I'm Christopher Conover. Thanks for listening.
Arizona Public Media's original programming is made possible in part by the Community Service Grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.